Pam Storey. I've just had my 81st birthday. I've been involved with the Passionists since the 1970s. So I go a long way back with the Passionists here at Holy Cross and also being involved with the Passionists. I've lived a very interesting life so far, and I hope it continues to be interesting, and I've had a lot of careers and done a lot of studies. But they've all sort of like a pudding mixed together to make me who I am. So I'm just Pam.
So, what was a significant experience that you felt vulnerable? How did it affect you?
When I read that first question, what is an experience that has made you feel vulnerable or suffering in your life, I immediately thought, so where do I begin? Because at 81 years of age, my body and my memory are telling me, wow, because my first experiences of feeling vulnerable and being in pain and suffering were in childhood and in family. Being the eldest in a family from a very poor working class, with parents who were deprived emotionally and psychologically in their own upbringing. And so they did their best, but they really didn't know how to be good emotional or psychological parents. And my father was in the army, and boys were the thing. And I was the eldest, and he had to wait to get 3 boys. So as a girl, I really had no value. And that sort of continued. There was a lot of feeling invisible, feeling not worthy, feeling undervalued. And I remember saying to a nun at school, why do my parents not love me? And she said, it's just the way they were brought up. They're doing their best. But she said, God loves you. So I think I would have been in about grade 4. And I went into the church next to the primary school and went to the little side chapel of the Sacred Heart, where you see Jesus with the heart, And I said, do you really love me? And I got this sort of feeling, yes, I love you. And here was I, a kid of about, 8 or 9. And I think I embraced that. And psychologists could say, it was answering a need. She wasn't loved at home, and so she put all that need on this God figure. But for me, it was real, and that God loved me. And so the love that I didn't get in my family, I knew God loved me. And I carried that through my times of anguish and pain and suffering as a child and as a teenager. And as I grew up, I had to fight for being a woman. I had to fight for my rights. I had to get a scholarship to go to secondary school because the boys went to secondary school, but girls didn't need an education and things like that. So I guess I grew up as a fighter. I guess I grew up as one who stuck up for myself. And people who know me say, well, why am I not surprised, But it started at a very early age that my response to feeling vulnerable was to stand up for myself and to stand up for that which was making me feel vulnerable, and to ask myself, is this fair? Is this just? Should this be happening? And so I guess at a very early age those questions sort of ran through my mind. And then when I married and had kids, that to me was just so important. That to me, relationships and having children was so important to me. And unfortunately, my marriage was not one that was the best. And my first time with cancer was in 1978. And I had 4 children, all at primary school. And I was at the Alfred Hospital, and I was dying. And I was in there about 3 months, and I remember at one stage thinking, I can't take the pain anymore. And people call it a near-death experience, but the pain stopped and I went into myself and I had this awareness of a choice that I could die and that would be okay. But if I chose not to die, God would always be with me, and there was a whole lot more I had to do. And even though I wouldn't have this experience of closeness with the divine for a long, long time, God would always be with me. And I remember coming out of that pain and something in me changed, and the nurses started saying, she's getting better, she's getting better. And 2 weeks after that, I went home and the leukemia went away without any more medication. And I went back to being a wife and a mother. But I went back as a different person because part of me asks the question, is this all there is to my life? Am I just meant to be a wife and a mother, putting meals on the table, washing, ironing? The challenge was there. Is there more? Is there more? Am I meant to be doing more? Am I meant to be being more? And so I started studying. And I remember it wasn't the done thing in those days for people to study theology. I'd trained as a teacher, so I was a Catholic primary teacher, but so you could teach religion, but you couldn't study theology. So people said to me, why are you studying theology? What are you going to do with a master's or a graduate diploma or whatever you're studying, a theology? And my answer to them was, look, it's not what I'll do with the qualification when I get it. It's what the study is doing to me while I'm doing it. Because I was changing and growing, and I was seeing things differently, understanding things differently. I was questioning. I was wanting to make a difference, and I was sharing that with my kids and sharing that with my husband. My kids understood. Unfortunately, my husband didn't. And unfortunately, and it's one of the most devastating things that could have happened to me, the marriage broke down and it fell away. And you ask what is one of the most painful and devastating things, and I think the breakup of a relationship that you put your body and your mind and your soul into, and you believe that when you take your vows it's for life, that is so crushing and so devastating that it can take years and years if you ever can get over it. And so there's something in me that took a long time to believe that I had to choose life, that this was the right thing to do, the right thing for me, the right thing for my former husband, the right thing for my children. And it was a real breakdown period. Nothing seemed to be able to fit together. I couldn't put myself together. I couldn't put the pieces together. I was completely shattered and broken. And it took me a long time, and you talk about where does hope come in. I'd shut my feelings down because to stay in the marriage for so long meant I had to stop feeling the pain. And when I left the marriage, the pain and the feelings resurfaced and I started feeling it. And when I started feeling it, I had to own the fact that I didn't want to be in this pain forever. Things had to change. And that's where hope came in, because a little voice inside me then said, things can change. There is a possibility of change. It's in how you respond to it. Don't stay stuck in the pain, but believe that there is something different. Believe that you can move. Believe that things can be different to what they are. And so that's what I learnt in that aspect of the breakdown of the relationship, that bad things happen, pain happens, suffering happens. And sometimes suffering is inevitable. Sometimes suffering is necessary. And sometimes suffering is not inevitable and it's not necessary and it's downright sinful, and you have to fight against it. And that's where hope comes in, and where Christian hope comes in. And that's where a passionist understanding of suffering comes in. Because as a passionist, I don't think I've got to lay myself open to suffering and take everything that comes. If it's inevitable, if it's necessary, then how do I respond to it? But if it's not necessary and if it's not inevitable, I'll fight it with all my might, whether it's me or it's another person. So I guess my body and my emotions have been learning. And so the next time cancer came, it was a non-Hodgkin's lymphoma right through my body, and I had to have chemo. My attitude to it was, oh, well, here we go. What do we do? How do I respond? How do I suck up the chemo? How do I get over losing my hair? And I had nephews who used to love pulling my wig off and running around with my wig on their own head and looking at me with a bare head. And I thought, make a joke of it, make light of it, make fun of it. You know, don't take yourself so seriously, Pam. You know, go easy, go lightly, tread gently, and laugh. And that's where I think I learnt the value of a sense of humour. That suffering really sometimes needs to be laughed at. Sometimes it needs to be sat with, and sometimes it needs to be cried with, and sometimes it needs to be talked to, and sometimes it needs to be laughed at. And so then cancer came again, and it was a moltoma in the stomach, and that was immunology, and that was a different treatment. And in between all this, my work went in and out of different occupations. You ask what hope and what the experience of suffering did to me. It made me really aware of people who were vulnerable, of people who were suffering. And so when I left education and when I finished other studies, I worked with people who'd experienced suicide. I worked in prisons, I worked in hospitals, I worked in the workplace. I worked where people didn't usually go. I worked with people who were forgotten, who were the outcasts. Because to me, that was where I was being called to. I love Micah's theme, you know, live justly, live honestly, and go where you're called to the Lord. And do it humbly, because all these people are suffering too. My pain and suffering is nothing compared to some other people's. And it's very similar to a lot of others. So we're all in this together. My daughter, one of my daughters said to me a few weeks back, you know, Mum, most of life is pretty shitty. You've got to look for the glimmers. She said, look for the glimmers. Those little bits of life and joy and happiness that make you smile and show you that there's something different to all the shit around. And so now when we talk on the phone, often our conversation is, seen any glimmers today? And she'll share something that's lifted her spirit or made her happy. And I'm thinking, isn't that a positive way to look at vulnerability and to look at suffering?
Was your faith a source of hope for you?
Christian hope for me is about the coming of the kingdom. And for me, that is a current reality. So anything that I might respond to that is of the not yet, I'm in pain, but things will get better, but it's a not yet. People are divided and unhappy, but there's a possibility for change, but it's not yet. The not yet is that openness to the coming of the kingdom where things will be in God's order, where there will be peace and justice and love and respect and dignity. And so any time that I can engender in a person a spirit that wants that to happen, that believes that will happen, that acts in that way, in their attitude or their behaviour, and I act in that way and believe that and bring about that in the present moment, I'm bringing about an aspect of the kingdom now. Because for me, the kingdom is both a present and a future reality. And it's my responsibility as a Christian and as a Passionist to let suffering be the cauldron, you like, of bringing forth something that's alive, that's burning, that's actually refining those aspects of justice and peace and respect and dignity. And the more we can have a person and an environment and a world that is birthing these things, we are bringing forth the kingdom. That's what Christian hope is for me.
So, since you have been a passionate companion for many years, I wonder, how did the passionate charism help you?
Before the Passionists were even started, there was a group run from Sydney, Gerard Mayo, I think, ran it, called the Confraternity of the Passion. And even though I was in Melbourne, I became a member of that. And he would send me the minutes down and things like that. So I was connected, and it was connecting to Passionist spirituality in terms of Paul of the Cross's writings and things like that. And I enjoyed Paul of the Cross's writings because I found them down to earth. I found them practical. And for a man who wrote in his time, when you looked at the culture of it, but you sort of shifted that, very psychologically balanced, and he was very human. And I thought, I can relate to this spirituality. And the more I studied it and the more I read about it and heard about it, the more I felt like I was coming home. The more I felt like this resonates really deeply within me. It makes sense. This is at my very deepest how I experience my relationship with God. So it felt like I belonged. And aspects of Paul of the Cross that I really resonate with are his use of physicality and his use of incarnating God. One of the expressions that he uses is, allow yourself to fall into the arms of God. And I think how intimate and how physical is that image of the love of a God and the welcoming acceptance that he gives to us as human beings. And I guess it was a challenge against all the old-fashioned hierarchical theology that we'd received in primary and secondary school. And so I welcomed Passionist spirituality as a breath of fresh air, as well as feeling that it resonated with me in a very familiar way. I sort of felt at home that this was a message that would embrace people, would accept people, would actually help people heal. Because I'd been working with very wounded people, very rejected people, people who felt unworthy and unloved. And here was a spirituality that expressed God in totally different terms, as a loving, welcoming, nurturing, embracing God, as a Christ who loves us, as suffering that is not meant to imprison us, but suffering that is meant to be either healing, challenging, or to be challenged against. You know, I can't tell someone who's impoverished and who's being bullied and who's being embezzled that it's right and to suck it up. I help them get lawyers. I help them find ways to object to it, because there are times when we need to empower people to fight against what's unjust. And I see both those sides in passion of spirituality. I guess for me, it has that wonderful aspect of being both missionary and mystical. I can be an activist, but I need to go back to the quiet time. And passion of spirituality has both for me.
So, what would you say to encourage people who are suffering at the moment?
I think when people are struggling, and I speak from experience, my own experience, what helps most is presence. That what helps most is knowing that someone is with them. And sometimes the gift of presence without words, but faithful presence. Not just here one day and gone tomorrow, but faithful presence. And I'm thinking of someone who is a friend of mine who regularly phones just to be there, without any great message, without any great words. But I know that they're there and they care. And so if a person knows I know and I care and I'm with them and I'm there for them, sometimes that's all that they can take at that moment. And if words help, then I need to be very careful that the words I choose are words that support them, that match where they are at that moment. We meet many people who have spiritualities different to our own. But those spiritualities might be the only thing that's holding them up. So if that's their wooden leg, we don't kick it away from them. We support them where they are with what is supporting them. We don't give them our own thinking it's better than theirs. We find out what supports them. I had a Jewish friend who was suffering from breast cancer, and she'd left her Jewish faith. And I was counselling her and I was helping her with meditation. But what she really needed was to be reconnected to her Jewish faith. So I helped her reconnect to her rabbi and helped her reconnect to her synagogue. And she died an active member of her Jewish community. So what do I say? What do I ask? What do you need? How can I help you? What would lift you up at the moment? What would give you joy? What would lift your spirit? That's what I would do.
What you just said is so practical, rather than giving them empty words. Thank you very much, Pam, for joining me, and I hope all the best for you.